kommer nu vädja till svenska folket idag att ha tålamod med det som nu följer. Att öppna sina hjärtan för de mycket utsatta människor som vi nu ser runt om i världen. Och jag kan redan säga att det kommer bli omfattande kostnader kopplat till de människor som nu redan kommer att komma de kommande åren.
Så att 40 miljoner invånare i Sverige, det kan du tänka dig.
Så länge människor kan komma hit, försörja sig själv, arbeta och driva företag, så ser jag inga problem med detta.
Men vad händer med det svenska, den svenska kulturen, det svenska språket?
I was coming back to Sweden, having spent most of my life abroad. I found a Sweden transformed. 2 million immigrants had been added to a small country of 8 million. Every year in the 2010s, Sweden received 100,000 people a year, 130,000 in 2019. Swedes will be a minority in their own country by 2050 at the latest. Already in the big cities, there are hardly a plurality of the young. Sweden is one of the most successful countries in the world. It's designated as the most gender-equal society. The current government boasts about being the world's first feminist government. Outsiders like myself are perplexed that a modern feminist country would want to bring in huge numbers of migrants, the majority of them male, from some of the worst places in the world for women. Countries such as Afghanistan, are they not concerned that it may endanger women? Are they not afraid it will reverse the accomplishments that feminists in the past fought for? Are they not afraid it will turn back the clock to a time of segregation by sex and social control? It's not just the feminists and government who appear to be careless of the dangers. Women in general are more favourable to immigration than men. Why so when they have the most to lose? And why this love affair between radical feminism and Islam, one of the most conservative ideologies out there?
Airplane, and there's a person getting deported to Afghanistan. Please don't take my phone, don't touch my phone.
The young woman who hijacked a plane declared that she was not leaving in order to stop the deportation of an Afghan man, who it turned out was a violent criminal, who was also quite happy to leave Sweden. What makes a young woman go to such extremes for this man? Young women, especially educated young women, vote for immigration-friendly political parties in Sweden and other Western countries. It's a paradox because the cultures being imported are not known for their support of human rights. Have female voters, female leaders and feminists created the preconditions for the return of male domination?
Våra normer som vi har växt upp med, de som har byggt vårt land starkt, de håller vi på nu att kasta bort.
Kvinnor blir mer ofria i Sverige idag, där vi ska ha en feministisk regering.
Varför mänskliga fri- och rättigheter gäller inte oss som invandrare kvinnor, bara gäller svenska kvinnor.
We're heading towards a chaos that is really unimaginable.
Ja, men det låter ju.
I'm off to meet Nina Drakfors, my first interviewee, in the small, rustic cathedral town of Scara. Scara was founded in the 9th century and it's Sweden's oldest town. It's probably seen as much demographic change in the last decade as in the previous 100. It has a population of 10,000 and has seen its population makeup utterly transformed since the refugee crisis in 2015. Many migrants were resettled by the government here. Locals are far from happy about it. Nina is a social worker and a rising politician in the Sweden Democrat Party, the only party sceptical to the project of making Sweden multicultural. It is as a citizen journalist that she really impresses. She targets feminists in power and focuses on rape and other issues such as violence against women.
Man måste vara hårdare och faktiskt utvisa mer. När kommer man till Sverige och gör en gruppvåldtäkt eller en våldtäkt, då ska man per automatik utvisas. Ja. Det ska vara i straffet. Man ska inte gynnas av att få stanna och ta del av våran välfärd om man har kommit hit och begått brott.
Det tycker jag är ofattbart i den svenska psykologin. För de flesta engelsmän hade varit ingen no-brainer att man skickar hem eller skickar ut något.
Nej, det är så bra. Allting är frid och fröjd och våra pensioner kommer räddas med en hög invandring. Och, ja, det går så bra för Sverige. Varför tycker inte svenska folket det då?
Förlåt, Anna.
Hej Anna, mitt namn var Nina. Jag läste din ledare som du har skrivit. Det handlar ju om de här sexuella övergreppen som har hänt i Tyskland och i Sverige och det. Nu i dagarna så har man ju fått upp att det handlar ju om att det var en arabisk våldtäktslek. Har du hört talas om det? Tararush.
Ja, det finns ju också svenska män som våldtar Sverige.
Ja. Men jämför du den här arabiska våldtäktsleken med svenska män?
Jag menar att det handlar om patriarkala strukturer. Patriarkala strukturer som tillåter män över hela världen att antasta kvinnor. Det sker hela tiden, överallt, i hela världen, i alla samhällen, av alla män. Förstår du?
Just terrorrush, då vet vi att det är utländska män som gör det här. Men säger man det, då var man en rasist i hennes ögon. Som jag ser det så vill de ju utmåla alla män för att distrahera bort sig från vad problemet består av. Jag är ju socionom i botten och jag tänker så här att för att lösa ett problem, då måste man också veta vad problemet består av. Då kan man inte generalisera och säga att alla män begår terrorrush. För alla män gör inte det. Vi har ingen kultur eller tradition i Sverige eller en kvinnosyn i Sverige där vi omringar kvinnor och sexuellt ofredar dem på dansgolv och så vidare. Som de gjorde i Tyskland.
Var det några exempel i Sverige också?
Ja, i Kalmar hände likadant. Jag har intervjuat en mamma vars dotter berättar att på ett diskotek i Kalmar så hände samma sak. Unga flickor omringades av utländska män som sexuellt ofredade dem. Det var till och med på nyårsnatten att det var jättemånga, flera kvinnor som de försökte dra in i bilar och i portuppgångar.
Tar staten ansvar?
Nej, det tycker jag absolut inte att de gör. De ska värna om vårat bästa först. Men som det ser ut idag så försöker de flytta bort fokus från hur deras politik har drabbat det svenska folket. Genom att inte tillstå att våldet har ökat, fler mord, gängkriminalitet och man kan se att stora delar hör till invandringen.
The government pretends that all is well, but their own statistics tell a different story. When I left Sweden in 1985, there were 16 reported rapes per 100,000. Today, the rate is 63 per 100,000. Much of the increase has occurred in the last 15 years, coinciding with a huge rise in non-European immigration. The government has refused to give the National Council for Crime Prevention a mandate to collect data on crime and ethnicity. The media and the universities have also been uninterested in such data, so I had to do my own digging. I discovered that another citizen journalist, not Nina, had taken on the enormous task by himself. His name is Patrik Jonasson and he wrote to every court in Sweden. Place of birth is always listed in court cases. They had to reply under Swedish Freedom of Information regulations, and what he found was staggering. 23% of third-degree rapes almost were carried out by people born in Afghanistan, while only 9% carried out by ethnic Swedish males. If Jonasson's correct, the overrepresentation by Afghans, therefore, is enormous. And if you see here, the countries that round up the top 10 list include Iraq, Somalia, Eritrea, Morocco. Men of non-European origin commit 84% of third-degree rapes. Swedes are in fourth place in absolute numbers, convicted after Afghans, Iraqis and Somalis. Nearly 2 out of 3 third-degree rapes are carried out by asylum seekers or men who've been given leave to remain. 90% of gang rapes are committed by men of non-European origin.
It's not only in rape statistics where migrants are massively overrepresented. 3/4 of murders in Sweden are carried out by people with migrant origins, which is a massive overrepresentation. Why does the Swedish government and the Swedish Crime Statistics Board not compile these statistics themselves and let them be known to the public?
Swedish men have not become more prone to rape, rather the opposite. The increase is almost entirely caused by immigration. Nina was right and the feminist was wrong. The police are well aware of where the violence is coming from, but they're attacked if they tell the truth, as this veteran policeman found out.
Även etniska svenskar som ägnar sig åt gruppvåldtäkt, men inte i den numerären som vi ser hos utländskfödda gärningsmän. Det är ett kulturellt fenomen. Det här med människosynen och hur man gör, det råder det ingen som helst tvekan. Det hör ju vi förhören också. Det är ju horor behandlas som horor och de är horor och hit och dit, va.
He was sued by his own employer and they tried to sack him. And he was attacked by Anne Ramberg, a feminist pro-immigration activist and head of the Swedish Lawyers Association.
Alla statstjänstemän och i allra högsta grad poliser måste ju ha ett bättre omdöme. De måste framförallt hålla sig till vår regeringsform och till den värdegrund som regeringsformen ger uttryck för. Och de här uttalandena är ju inte i överensstämmelse med det. De är ju närmast rasistiska.
Her accusation of racism is a distraction from the results of failed policies. Non-European men are not overrepresented in crimes against women because of their skin colour. Race has got nothing to do with it. It's about ideas and culture, just as the policeman said. Just to be clear, we've got to put a few things into perspective. Most women will never be raped, and most migrants are not rapists. Many are working extremely hard to succeed in their adopted country. The Swedish murder rate, further, is about average for Europe, and it's not getting all that much worse quickly. But migrants are extremely overrepresented in violent crime and violent rape statistics compared to ethnic Swedes. There is a violent and crime-prone migrant minority. Even if it's true that rising rape levels in Sweden are partly due to changing definitions of what constitutes rape and increasing tendency to report rapes, it's also true that if suddenly all ethnic minorities were to go away, third-degree rape levels would go down by maybe 90%. Sweden would be safer and presumably feel safer for women. So one answer why women are so in favour of immigration is that they are not informed about the risks. If they knew that 9 out of 10 assault rapes are due to immigration, would they still be in favour? Probably many would. Swedes at all levels of society are instructed to enforce the multicultural social experiment, whatever the costs. In fact, they're schooled into it. I talked to Anneli Sjöberg, a former teacher of French, who explained to me the level of indoctrination. I was joined by veteran print journalist Anna, who wanted to help me with my film, anonymously.
Det fanns en tjej som frågade, får man tycka att Sverige inte ska ta emot riktigt så här många invandrare? Får man ha den åsikten i skolan? Hon ställde frågan. Det var ju liksom som en strategi, en gemensam strategi, och det finns på Skolverket, det finns liksom i det finns i läroböcker. Man ska säga ja till hur mycket som helst. Så att det var ju en propaganda som mer eller mindre gick ut på att det fanns inget tak på hur många vi kunde ta emot. Det var liksom öppna gränser och svenska ungdomar skulle bara finna sig i att vi har en moralisk skyldighet att ta emot. Och ungdomar är ju välvilliga, goda, snälla och lättpåverkade. Så de är tacksamma offer för den här.
Blev de liksom aktivister för det här? Intoleranta aktivister för den här frågeställningen?
Ja, många blir ju det.
Som kulturrevolutionen i Kina typ.
Ja, precis. Och de som då kanske var lite mer kritiskt tänkande eller som ifrågasätter det här, de lärde sig också att det här får vi hålla tyst om. Vi kan prata om det utanför skolan, vi kanske kan prata om det hemma, men visa aldrig åsikt i klassrummet.
Sparka revbenen! Man går med nåla!
Gang stomps a girl in the head, Swedish girl. Kill her, wallah. Kill her in the name of Allah. Fuck the ribs. Stamp out her ribs. This is a a gang doing this to a teenage girl, a Swedish girl. I can't bear it anymore. What's going to happen? I don't know. The Swedes are so passive and they make so many excuses. I wouldn't say that the young women of Scara look afraid, but I don't inhabit their world. That said, there is from my middle-aged perspective a certain edginess in the town that was not there before. It used to be a town of Zimmer frames and elderly people feeding ducks in the park. Now you often see cars driven violently down the cobbled streets by young non-European males. The town has never needed police patrols before, but I've started seeing some recently. It's a bit sad. I lived nearly all my life in London, but tiny Scara, a small town in the middle of Sweden, feels just as international, and that feels wrong. Nina and Annalie expressed a nostalgia for the past. I knew exactly what they're on about. I was born in London, but spent part of the 1970s and 80s in Sweden when my Swedish mother moved back. Sweden was safe, stable, and maybe a bit unexciting. There was a tendency to romanticize everything foreign. I did so myself and moved back to London in 1985. In retrospect, I realized what a great place Sweden was and how free our childhoods were. There was no anxious tracking on mobiles, and mobiles didn't exist. Life was innocent, there was no crime, and young women did more or less what they wanted to. They could return at dawn on a midsummer's morning after dancing barefoot in the dewy grass in a local park. Will this sort of freedom be possible in the new Sweden, which will eventually have a Muslim character? It's just a matter of time.
الله كرم المرأة بهذه العقوبة، عقوبة الضرب. كيف؟
كرمها بالضرب؟
اي والله.
مش معقول.
كيف؟ قال نبينا صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم: ولا تضرب الوجه.
In Sudan. Okay. In the main square outside, you see 6-year-old girls with hijabs occupying the public space. I don't know, it's like a copyright symbol, a Nike swoosh. This hijab says Islam is here. In the last year or so, you see a big difference. They've stopped pixelating the pictures of migrants. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 11. Scara has undergone big changes. You see women and girls in hijabs everywhere, all the time. In the historic town centre, there's a slight third world vibe, with hair extension shops and African produce and barbershops called Lebanon. And this is a middle-class historic church town, so a clear sign Sweden and the rest of Sweden is changing utterly and forever. Because it's like this everywhere, from the biggest cities to the smallest town, not to mention the suburbs of Stockholm where migration is most concentrated and where white faces are exceedingly rare. It's really a kind of population replacement, and it's a consequence of Swedish women, especially young women influenced by feminism, voting for parties that support open borders. Unemployment is high and there's little contact between the migrants and the locals. Many immigrants come from countries with terrible human rights records for women, Afghanistan and Somalia. When you have a large number of immigrants who form their own world, they do not have to interact with the Swedes. So how are they going to adopt the world's most liberal attitudes to women? And why should they? I had a sobering conversation with a Syrian engineer who explained what some of the immigrants are saying among themselves.
Why you do this to Sweden? This is a nice country and we enjoy it. I don't care about country who are not believed. So go to hell. Sooner or later we will be here at this country and Islam will be all over the place in the world. They believe in this. So if we are good people, why we have bad country?
Yeah.
And where they are, none believe and they have good country.
Yeah.
This is what God wants. They build their country and then come to take it.
While the Syrian engineer was at the loo, I glanced at the local newspaper. The main story is about a middle-aged man who raped a 12-year-old girl and made her pregnant. The Swedish media often don't carry ethnic details, but one can guess that this is the case of a Muslim child bride. On the inside page, there's a sympathetic story about migrant men called unaccompanied minors who fear being deported before they can start high school. These men claim to be 17, but do they look 17 to you? The author of this sympathetic article is the usual suspect, a young white middle-class woman in her 20s.
The women, sometimes, we can say they are more simple-hearted, because this is a type of woman, she's compassion more. Men didn't fall in mistakes, but women, they do.
شنیدیم که آقای خامنه‌ای چی گفتن در مورد دوچرخه سواری ما و سریع اومدیم دوچرخه کرایه کردیم که بگیم ما ورزش.
Marine, a recent immigrant from Syria, is one of my friends in Scara. She's behind an integration project where immigrant women are taught how to ride a bike, an activity that's taboo or even illegal in the countries where they come from. She wants to free their bodies and free their minds, but it's an uphill struggle. The multiculturalist state wants to respect immigrant cultures, not change them or liberalize them.
What's the force that prevents them from changing?
The Muslim men, of course, and the community. Don't forget that we still, like in Scara, it's a Muslim community. It is a Muslim community. So they are together everywhere, watching each other. My brother, for example, they are fighting him.
Really?
They are just doing groups against him.
Really?
Yeah, but he's strong and he doesn't care.
Why you need to stay in that group? You can get out.
He's going to study Swedish in SFI. Svenska för invandrare.
Oh my god.
So in a way these SFI places can be quite oppressive in a way.
It is like a mosque.
Oh my god. I'm afraid because I have to start. I have to start learning Swedish.
You will hate your life.
Oh my god.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to remember it. You're surrounded with them and they were like, they have their rules and and even the school, they're changing their theme.
Right.
We have Islam theme now in SFI.
Right.
With the Muslims and characters on their websites.
It's getting
and
worse.
In a way, that neutralizes the secular element among the Muslims because it's saying all Syrians are Muslim, and it's normalizing Islam, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
An alliance between the government and the Islam.
Yeah.
When you did SFI, did you get social pressure as well? Did they do?
Yeah, but I used to run away. I used to, in the break, I don't stay in SFI. I go and eat my fika in the car.
Marine's biking school is an example of why immigrants should come to Sweden to be more free and cast off old oppressive identities. SFI is one of the first contacts immigrants have with Swedish society, but if it presents an Islamic theme, where are they supposed to get the modern Swedish identity from? The question is, will newcomers become more modern and liberal, or will Sweden become more religious and traditional?
Jag anser att min skola islamiserades. I den mån att skolan anpassade sig till att islam flyttade fram sina positioner. Till exempel, nu kom det en elev som ville ha ledigt på fredag för att gå till moskén och be. Skulle en svensk elev ha bett att få åka till Ullared så hade det inte varit på tal om saken. Eller om man var pingstvän, då hade man sagt nej. Men här diskuterade man alltså allvarligt att vi kanske måste göra det. Ville de inte bada tillsammans så skjutsade man dem med buss till en annan kommun. Så att de fick bada, killar och tjejer för sig. Nej, jag tänker inte arbeta tillsammans med flickor. Vi tänker inte sitta bredvid. De vill ha den här könsseparatismen i klassrummet. Och det finns svenska kollegor som viker sig för det och tycker att men de har ju sin kultur och sin religion. Lärare liksom understödjer det här kvinnoförtrycket med vår så kallade snällhet eller undfallenhet.
Är det då den muslimska religionen som är liksom mer dominant eller ger större rättigheter till män?
Ja, deras religiösa tro är starkare än vårt sekulära samhälle för vi viker oss för deras religion.
Bra ackord.
Swedes increasingly feel alienated from their own country. Towns, suburbs, transforming into places where the state and Swedish state and the Swedish society and Swedish culture lost its grip.
So tell us your story, why you're in the news at the moment.
Well, my name is Pierre Durrani. I'm 45 years of age, and my background is that my father is from Pakistan and my mother is Swedish. I was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood for 2 years, from 94 to 96, but became increasingly critical towards their kind of Islamic interpretation and left that environment. Together with two colleagues, Magnus Norell and I Carbo, I wrote a small report trying to find out how the Muslim Brotherhood is structured, and their aims and motives. We said that it is actually a problem with Islamist groups taking taxpayer money and funding their activities, which influences first and foremost the so-called Muslim communities, maybe more important, the Swedish society in its whole. And we said that they are in the process of establishing something similar to a parallel structure, a parallel society, with their own schools and establishments. And they're very socially conservative, reactionary in a sense, a movement that have a quite harsh view on the sexes, the different genders, especially in such a hyper-modern society as Sweden, backlash of sorts, if you acknowledge their voice as a valid one.
Do they relate to the secular Swedish parties in some way?
They have been quite active in establishing friendly relationships with the Social Democrats, the Greens in Sweden, and in some sense some other parties, for example the moderates and the Left Party. And the very fact that Swedish taxpayers pay for different organizations constituted by Islamists who undermine their very societies is a really crazy paradox.
What Durrani revealed is shocking. Members of the Swedish government and politicians of governing parties are engaged with members of an Islamic organization that's labeled a terrorist organization in some Arabic countries like Egypt. Swedish tax money is spent on this. How does this benefit women? I'm on my way to a place I cannot mention for reasons that will become apparent. A woman who has a shelter, a block of flats for battered and beaten immigrant women. We can't reveal its location, but I can tell you that it's surrounded by a 3-meter high metal fence and protected by the latest surveillance technology to keep out angry ex-husbands.
Det började 2011. Jag var på väg att hämta min son från skolan. Det kom en bil rasande mot mig, vill köra över mig. Det var en man med lång skägg. Det var en svensk man som räddade mig nästan. Drog mig, annars jag kunde vara död. Efter den har börjat med lappar, med brev, med sms, med telefonsamtal. Flera gånger de har knivhuggat bilen. Jag skriver lös bildäcken här. En gång jag håller på att köra ihjäl mig i E4 tror jag. Brev jag har fått, hotbrev med blodiga knivar. Kasta sten till vår fönster. Jag lever inte som andra. Det är ett land som är känt för mänskliga fri- och rättigheter. Som är känt för demokrati. Jag har inte den friheten som andra kvinnor har. Jag var en av dem som socialen såg inte så mycket vad hände hemma. Jag hade blåmärken men jag gömde den. Att ingen ska se. Det var skamligt.
Var detta när du först kom hit eller?
Ja.
Så din man slog dig?
Ja.
Vad var det? Tyckte han också att du blev för fri här eller vad var det som...
Nej, jag fick inte umgås så mycket. Jag fick inte bjuda folk hem. Jag fick inte vara som andra kvinnorna. Sen han var själv fri. Han gick ut, han var överallt. Men kvinnor, allt där ute var smutsigt, allt där ute var oren. Jag kommer ihåg första gången jag såg en gris. Jag tänkte, oj, Allah kommer att straffa mig. Eller jag såg lesbiska kvinnor som kysste varandra. Jag stirrade på dem. Det var så ovanligt för mig. Eller jag såg här nakna statyn. Vad är det här? Vad är det för land jag har hamnat? Hon berättade att hon hade blivit misshandlad därför hon hade druckit kaffe ute i stan. Kom en idé som barn, jag fick inte komma nära till hus. Till hus är bara för män. Jag tänker, jag provar bara för kvinnor. Nu vi har över 20 kommuner som vill ha tehus. Vi har 7 tehus i Sverige. Vi har räddat över 1000 kvinnor och barn. Vi har flickor som har blivit av med bröst, med näsa, med öron. 9-åringar som har blivit bortgift med äldre män här i Sverige. Det händer mycket sådana som gör mig arg, ledsen, besviken. Feministerna har en bild. Förtryckare är alltid i svenska kulturer den vita mannen. De som blir förtryckta är människorna i andra kulturer och vita männen. Men den här bilden stämmer inte. Därför vi ser andra verkligheten. Den som man ser som offer på dem, de är själva förtryckare. De misshandlar kvinnor. De tål inte andra människor av andra religioner. Och det här borde de se verkligheten istället. Men de väljer sin karta och sin modell istället för verkligheten. Och det gör oss besviken. Varför mänskliga fri- och rättigheter gäller inte oss som invandrare kvinnor? Bara gäller svenska kvinnor, gäller inte oss.
Men har du träffat någon svensk feminist och förklarat vad du försöker göra?
Jag har talat ofta och ofta jag blir utskälld av dem. Efter mina föreläsningar kommer feministerna fram och säger du ger röster till Sverigedemokraterna. Det här är fel du talar om, du ska inte lyfta upp här frågan. Jag blev chockad.
Sweden is supposed to be the country of the precautionary principle. Sweden is a country that bans everything if there's a slightest risk to human life. Sweden is a country that pioneered seatbelts, that invented the Volvo, which is the acme of boring safety, and yet they're taking enormous risks with their own freedom. The potential rewards are nothing compared to the risks.
Att vara feminist, det var också att vara så kallad antirasist. Och var man antirasist så betyder det att vi mer eller mindre skulle ha öppna gränser.
Varför faller de offer så att säga för islams patriarkat? Varför är de en enabler som man säger på engelska?
Alltså de väljer ju att inte peka ut islam eller deras anhängare som att de på något vis skulle ha någon annorlunda kvinnosyn eller kultur. Utan de väljer att klumpa ihop det till patriarkatet. Samtidigt som de faktiskt lägger fokus på de vita, svenska, heterosexuella männen. Men aldrig andra män från andra kulturer. Utan det finns om det är en rädsla eller om det för att de vill skydda dem därför att de anser att muslimer är en förtryckt grupp. Så därför får de inte på något vis skuldbeläggas. För det är rasism. Jag tycker inte det är logiskt. Jag deltog i folkets demonstration i Stockholm och öppet kritiserade regeringen och deras politik. Och jag kritiserade svensk feminism som ideologi.
Jag ser gärna en ny kvinnorörelse som växer fram i Sverige. En som är något helt annat än det som svensk feminism förknippas med idag. En rörelse som ägnar sig åt riktiga kvinnofrågor utan att se tillvaron som en könskamp. Där det handlar om att vinna eller som en tävling i lidande.
Och då tog det inte många dagar förrän jag blev inkallad direkt och jag blev omedelbart arbetsbefriad. Jag fick gå hem och sen så blev jag mer eller mindre ställd inför ultimatum att säga upp dig eller säga upp dig.
So the feminists pretend that all white men are the source of the increased violence against women and depict them, us, as part of some evil system. I think this picture of the world, this faulty worldview, hurts and endangers Swedish women and girls. But most of all, it hurts immigrant women and girls like Sohaila and the women she's helping. Feminism in Sweden as elsewhere was necessary and worked for the liberation of women. 1864, the right not to be physically disciplined by her husband. 1872, the right to decide whom to marry. 1919, the right to vote and serve in the Swedish parliament. In 1989, all jobs were open for women, even in the military. All this represents important progress and it's worth defending. Today, Swedish feminism has been taken over by the post-Marxist idea of the victim pyramid, where white men are on the top and everyone else is a victim in one way or another. Feminism has also been co-opted by this terrible idea of multiculturalism, the idea that it's desirable to have a plurality of cultures existing within a country. Swedes have a yearning for the exotic. Other cultures are interesting and colourful. Foreign countries are romanticised and idealised, and they cannot be criticised. So I turned to an acquaintance, Johan Adamsson, who specialises in the corrosive effects of multiculturalism on the liberal left.
If you put multiculturalists in front of people who live under terrible circumstances, and you ask them, okay, so what do you want to do? Then the multiculturalist is likely to say, we shouldn't do anything. Because we need to keep other cultures intact. If we would say that there has to be social change here, then we would be deemed racists. We couldn't do that, because only a racist would say that other cultures have to change. The whole idea, Western feminist, radical feminist, completely neglects of the horrors in certain cultures. And I have to say that Islam is part of this package. I regret to say that, but it has to be stated. You cannot combine feminism with endorsing reactionary religions. Whether it's reactionary Catholicism or Islam, you just can't. Because feminism is by nature a very modernist idea. It's a lovely idea. It means that men and women are equal. So face it.
Islam and the ways of more traditional cultures are advancing. Women and many Swedes dare say nothing against it. They do nothing to stop it for sure. They're afraid of being called racists. Even the race has got nothing to do with it, and it's all about ideas and culture. People I've talked to know these cultures well. They're not racists, and they're not ignorant. The cultures they left behind are coming to pursue them. They worry that Sweden is being transformed into a less modern society and may even eventually end up like Khomeini's Iran. Multiculturalism has been added to feminism, and it makes women unable to stand up for their immigrant sisters. So they gallop around the statue of the 17th century warrior king Gustav Adolf, but the feminists have nothing to say about child brides and female circumcision, which happen in today's Sweden. They profess to hate their own Swedish culture, even if it's the most egalitarian in the world, while being completely blind to the flaws of the cultures they're importing en masse. But what will they do when they're no longer in the majority? No feminist from Sweden has been willing to talk to us yet, but I did go to the US to talk to one of the most important second-wave feminists in the world, Phyllis Chesler. As a young woman, she married an Afghan man. She moved to Kabul to be with him. Her passport was taken away from her, and she found herself under the control of her husband's father, the true patriarch. Her mother-in-law literally tried to poison her because she's Jewish. Phyllis was lucky to escape alive. Her romantic, youthful naivety cost her freedom and nearly her life. Her life story perhaps sends a stark warning message to Swedes.
The Sweden that I have visited and lectured in and know something about used to be so righteously fair, which is now suicidal, unfortunately. And they've elected more women, they've had more gender parity in government. It's unbelievable that they would now squander all this moral wealth that they've achieved because they're afraid of being called racists if they stop criminal behavior, or if they call it for what it is, or if they prosecute it. When I came back from Kabul, and this was very early, it was the end of 1961, there was no Taliban. The Soviets had not yet tried to take over the country or invaded it. Hope was rising. Indeed, women would start being naked-faced and wearing more modern Western clothing without gloves and hijab and long, heavy coats, which was the custom among upper-class women when I was there. Even then, when I tried to tell my bohemian and intellectual college mates, I tried to say something about human slavery, about the mistreatment and brutalization of female servants by their female employers, about polygamy, about purdah, the sequestration of women. So I couldn't go out without a male escort. And they didn't understand. They said, oh, but didn't you meet the king? Didn't you have servants? Are you now a princess? And I could not get through, because there was a fantasy world about the East. Westerners, I mean, many Westerners have indeed romanticized the East, and there is a beauty to it and a danger to it too. Feminists, who in my time, second wave feminism, raised the alarm and challenged the consciousness of the entire world about violence against women, about women's rights, about women's dignity and right to freedom and autonomy. And we did so many things that are still at work in the world. These are the feminists who you would think would be right out there condemning honor killing, condemning stoning to death, condemning the automatic rape of female prisoners in Evin prison in Tehran. And you would expect feminists to say, wait, stop, no. What we see instead is feminism, like the rest of the Western progressive movements, has been hijacked by racism, which trumps sexism. Sexism is completely inferior to racism, and men who've been colonized, especially Muslim men, Arab Muslim men, Palestinian, whatever that may be, Muslim men, are the most sacred of victims, the Uba victims, and that is the most important. And even though they are victims who we should be standing by, are women of color also. So feminists, the best feminists, have totally lost their way.
Today's multicultural feminists have betrayed real feminism, the one that Phyllis fought for. Real feminism is about promoting freedom and equality for women, not about romanticizing, protecting and promoting illiberal cultures or hating white men. The Swedes have been sold the same idea that Sweden must become multicultural. What explains why women are less skeptical than men? Something the Syrian engineer said struck a chord. Women are more compassionate, caring and mothering, on average. Women read fiction, men read non-fiction. When immigrants are presented as vulnerable, women want to help them. This natural response silences any doubts about long-term social and cultural consequences, and even thoughts about how best to help. Voting patterns are another proof of different male and female natures, and perhaps it explains why a young woman would hijack an airplane to save an Afghan man. She felt sorry for him. Rules and regulations be damned, mercy over justice. women are more compassionate. It's a simple explanation and it seems true, but it goes up against one of the most fiercely promoted and held dogmas of right-thinking Swedes, that sex and gender are social constructions and that there's no such thing as a female nature. The idea that gender is a construction is the other pillar of modern radical feminism, the first being the idea of the white patriarchy. I went to Lund University to talk to the experts who've really experienced this in action.
There are many sort of superficial aspects of male and female behavior, like dress and some parts of behavior, etc., hairstyles and things like that, that are cultural and that are learned. But there are also a lot of personality traits that probably are not learned. And some of these differences, you can see them in children on the day they are born. You can see behavioral differences between boys and girls. And many of these differences are also, they fit very well into an evolutionary account, a Darwinian account of male and female behavior, which I sort of think supports the idea that there are fundamental differences between men and women. And of course, this is something that most people realize, understand. It's only people who have academic education and have sort of been untaught the basic facts of nature. There's a strong sex difference in aggressiveness, combativeness, competitiveness. Also in a trait sometimes called agreeableness. Girls and women are simply nicer. Men are more dominant, more aggressive, competitive. Women are less so. Well, they're more agreeable. They're easier to deal with, more diplomatic, etc. There is a difference in to what extent you're focused on other people versus the extent to which you are focused on things. And this is expressed in boys' interests in cars and tools and stuff like that, whereas girls tend to be more interested in people, children, other children, relationships between other people and themselves and other people and so on. Again, this is something that most people know instinctively, but it expresses itself in differences in occupational choices, choice of education, choice of occupation, and so on. This is something that has been fought, I would say, by ideologically driven people, in this case feminists mainly, but it's been sort of accepted by many others too. And this fight against nature, I would say, also has, for instance, supported the ideas of quotas, that you should try to achieve an equal number of men and women in different occupations and in education, which I think is basically an unbiological way to look at it.
As old as 35, I was absolutely convinced that men and women are psychologically identical. I thought it was only the bodies that differed. Mm. But since then I've been reading up a lot on evolution and evolutionary psychology specifically, and you would be quite unrealistic in assuming that any species would be psychologically identical across the two sexes, because the two sexes have different functions evolutionarily. The brains of men and women are organized differently. We can see that anatomically, and we can see that there is a relation between the hormone levels and the type of organization that occurs during ontogeny.
When you get teenagers coming to you from having been through the 12-year-old school system and reading their daily newspapers, do you find that you've got a lot of work to do with many of them to try and to show them what science tells you?
The students tend to be, very interested and very, very surprised. They say, I had no idea these things existed. So apparently they haven't been exposed to that in the school system. basic ideas about heritability and especially the heritability of psychological traits.
Yeah.
Like mental illnesses and personality, intelligence, and so forth.
Yeah.
These are very well established things in the research literature,
Yeah.
but apparently they aren't communicated in the classes on biology and social sciences in primary and secondary school. Apparently not.
Gosh. Hey, sorry we're late. Terribly sorry. Hi, good to see you.
Men and women are equally intelligent on the average.
Yeah.
So you have a kind of bell curve.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. But if you look at the extremes, who are the really, really intelligent people and who are the really, really non-intelligent people, there you have the males.
Yeah.
So the really, really intelligent people are more often males than they are females.
Yeah.
And that's compatible with the average being the same for both.
Yeah.
And you would like to see some of the really, really intelligent people to be the professors or the Of course, there are a lot of other traits that you have to exemplify to be a good professor.
Yeah.
So you have to have a kind of intellectual energy, and they have to be open-minded and all that kind of thing. But they can also be had to various extremes. And it turns out that when it comes to almost all properties, men are more extreme than females. So therefore, you would expect the really, really suitable academics to be more often men than women. That simply follows from intelligence research.
Right.
There's nothing strange from that.
No, exactly. You said you're an equal opportunities feminist.
Yes, I want to make perfectly clear that I'm of course not against the equal opportunity. That's for me the good kind of feminism. That you want to have people who are merited to get the right position, regardless of their sex or gender. And so that's extremely important. But so what I'm talking about when I'm criticizing feminism is the radical form, which says that there are essentially no differences between men and women. Concerning the intellectual capacities and so on. Which I see as basically flawed science.
Yeah.
So that's just to make that perfectly clear.
Yeah. You've always got to go with the science, haven't you? You can make moral judgments, but you can't ignore the science and pretend that it doesn't exist.
No, especially when you have sciences which deal with what everyone would say is the same topic, namely, sex in the natural world.
Yeah.
And so how can you disregard evidence from that science if you're doing that kind of thing on the human level? It would be one thing if they cared about it, they looked at it and they denounced the evidence. I would have some respect for that. But if you don't care about the evidence that comes from other areas, then that's to me pseudoscience. Had it been just an academic issue, that kind of feminism would have disappeared sooner or later because it was a kind of degenerate research program because it's not really based on fact. But if you have that kind of structure and you have government support for those ideas, then you have a completely different situation. So these two levels, they support each other somehow. So the government gets support supposedly from academia because they get support from gender studies. And gender studies get support, of course, from funding and from the government. So it's
and then they go into government. Maybe
they go into,
students choose this because they think, just like in the communist Eastern Europe, they say, I've got to study communism if I want to get into the government, because they don't believe it, but it's just
exactly like that. Exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to give someone harsh criticism at Swedish universities. So that will be treated as a work environment issue.
The academic culture I grew up with is you attack the idea, obviously, to improve the idea. And the bad idea gets discarded. So you stop a person from pursuing the wrong idea if it's a bad idea, and then he picks up a better idea. And that's how ideas advance.
Exactly.
I don't know, an 18th century John Stuart Mill idea, but that's changing now.
Yes, I think it's changing.
Is it because there's a confusion between the person and the idea? They think you're criticizing the person when you're actually criticizing the idea.
Yes, I think that's increasingly the case. This is partly an effect of the increased female activities in academia. So we have more female professors, we have more female lecturers and so on. We have above all, we have much more female managers and university leaders. And that certainly affects the whole thing because women have a tendency to be less tolerant about what you can say and what you can do, and more concerned with keeping social ties, and having a nice work environment and things like that. So it would be very strange if the fact that we now see increased female involvement at the university didn't at all have any connection with the fact that we also see a limitation of freedom of speech.
What the academics told me was that male and female natures are real, not constructed. Female kind-heartedness explains why they're more influenced by emotional appeals portraying all immigrants as vulnerable. That's why the unaccompanied minor features so prominently in the media. In an alienating modern society where we're out of touch with our practical child-rearing roots, it's not the custom for middle-class women to have children before they're 30. Migrants become surrogate children, hence the unbelievable aggression with which they're sometimes defended by women in their 20s. I also learned that women are by nature compromising, more interested in social ties and more likely to take criticism personally. Obviously, some women are more aggressive than some men, but we're talking averages here. Erik Olsson, who's a professor of theoretical philosophy, is as smart as they come. He thinks female power in academia is a threat to freedom of speech, as not offending becomes more important than seeking the truth, and perhaps that's what we're seeing in society at large. Getting along and compromising is more important than seeking the truth. Critiquing ideas such as Islam is confused with criticizing Muslims, when of course they're not the same thing. When faced with intolerant cultures, the female instinct is to appease and befriend rather than confront and challenge. Intolerance is tolerated so that everyone can get along in the short run. But this approach has its limitations.
Was taught not to ask questions about anything.
Well, they may be
Listen
asked
to
questions
their
about
story.
different things. I mean,
yeah, but so you mean
we're
that,
not
that
taught,
our
like,
generation only asks critical things concerning gays?
Well, I mean, for instance, you're probably not as critical about Islam as our generation was, you know? So you're more critical of
because
one
we
thing
become more tolerant and understanding of other cultures and religions. And that's,
Islam
well, we're still critical. I feel like
religion.
tolerance is not a bad thing. Like you always, I mean,
can you be tolerant towards intolerance?
Yeah.
Why?
Because that's the only way to show them that. It's I actually I have to go, but I don't know, man.
The students have a point. Some intolerance has to be tolerated, but you tolerate that men cannot work with women or swim with women, or that women must dress in a certain way, then you're gradually losing your tolerant society. Unfortunately, these students just want to be nice, but sometimes you have to be tough to defend a good society.
Det finns ingen väg tillbaka.
Sverige blir aldrig som det varit.
Det är inte bara nya svenskar som ska integreras.
Alla behöver integreras, även etablerade svenskar. Integration handlar om ömsesidighet.
Något nytt.
Are we really meaning that the most secular and most self-expressed society on the planet should meet the other people who are more religious and more survival-based halfway? Meaning to say that we should really be cast backwards in a sense to another time and place, making Sweden a more and more religious and more conservative, reactionary, more patriarchal society full of fear-based, with a weaker state and more tribalistic affiliations, just to normalize or to integrate ourselves in a sense.
Integration can mean that one meets in the middle, but why should the world's most liberated society want to meet some of the most traditional, tribal and survival-oriented societies in the world in the middle? In Afghanistan, women are marriageable at 12, and Sweden is at 18, so should we split the difference and allow them to marry at 15? In Afghanistan, gays are put in jail, so should there be just a fine against this middle road Sweden? What's the median between topless and fully clothed on the beach?
Is integration something we wish for? No, it isn't. We don't want to go back. We want to make our own society function. Do we want people to assimilate? Yeah, perhaps we want, but is it possible? I don't know. I don't think so.
If you talk about freedom of speech and if you talk about women's rights, some people seem to think, especially I would say leftists, they seem to think that, multiculturalists, they seem to think that we won and we don't need to do anything more. And then But they don't realize that you need actually, the battle goes on every day. You need to say that, you need to speak up, you need to defend these ideas, because if you don't, there will be other values, maybe stronger values, and you will be dead meat. You will lose the battle. And they don't seem to understand.
Våra normer som vi har växt upp med, de som har byggt vårt land starkt, de håller vi på nu att kasta bort och införa normer och värderingar som råder i vissa dysfunktionella kulturer och stater. Människor måste bli medvetna om att vårt samhälle håller på att förändras i grunden. Om vi inte gör någonting åt det, det är vi som måste göra det.
Vi är krigsskadade, men ni svenskar har fredskada. Jag menar inte illa, men ni har glömt bort vad hände. Vad har de kämpat? Din mormor och faster, och de var för 100 år sedan och kämpade för här rättigheterna. Men det verkar man har glömt bort den. Det är dags att vakna och skydda demokrati. Anpassa dig, varsågod. Du anpassar dig lite till din paradis. Det är inte hårt att säga så. Annars vi förstår hela landet.
The self-proclaimed world's first feminist government and women in power have created a situation that calls for an uncompromising defence of the modern Sweden. It's either that, or more conservative norms could gradually turn back the clock on gender relations. This is not a time for compromise and simple-hearted compassion. It's the time to enforce Swedish values, laws and customs without giving an inch. I admit Sweden is becoming foreign to me. I want Sweden to be like when I left it, not more masculine and aggressive, not just another multicultural surveillance state, not a new country. I feel English, but I have an immense sympathy for the country where my mother was born. I see Sweden as a country that attracts immigrants like Loreen and Sohaila. They've seen a different world and they know how precious a safe and functioning society is. Like them, I've travelled the world, and we have more of a common understanding of what Sweden should be like than those Swedes dreaming of a new rainbow nation in the north. Sweden is the only home that Swedes have, and it's worth fighting for.
Kanske i din och min generation faktiskt finns en naiv övertro på att vi svenskar är moraliskt överlägsna och vi klarar av att stå emot allt. Och de inser inte att deras barn inte har fått uppleva den här friheten som vi har fått. När man kunde springa topless på stranden, det var inget konstigt. Man kunde vara ihop med killar och jag har inte växt upp och varit rädd någonsin. Idag får man vara rädd både som ung kvinna och som lite äldre. Och det här blir en normalisering därför att den här unga generationen vet ju ingenting annat om. Och föräldragenerationen har ännu inte riktigt förstått att det här är inte lika självklart för deras barn som det var för dem. Och de ser inte utvecklingen.
invandrare. Vi kommer att förändra Sverige, men på vilket sätt? Ska Sverige vara öppet och tolerant eller sluta och intolerant? Det här måste vi fatta beslut. Vi måste sätta krav på kulturförstörelse. Krav på mänskliga fri- och rättigheter gäller även kvinnor.
Kvinnor, när de kommer ur det här godhetssyndromet, då kommer vi att kunna förändra Sverige. Jag tror att det är bara kvinnorna som kan göra detta. De måste vakna upp och börja försvara sina barn och sitt land och sitt liv.